So one of my favorite things to do on this channel is to take common workspace or storage issues and try to come up with a unique solution. And this method of problem solving has brought us several super handy non-traditional builds. The transforming table allowed us to free up workspace by being able to fold our workbench into a shelf. And then version 2 was redesigned to fit small spaces for both indoor and outdoor use. And the ultimate garage storage system saved us tons of room by using vertical storage. We were able to completely organize garages and only use up 29 square feet of space. And the hybrid workbench changed the game by allowing us to transform our workspace at will to fit the needs of any project that comes up. And in today's video, we're going to be doing it again with the pitch perfect angled lumber vertical storage rack Onator 2000. No, really, I don't know what to call it, so if you have any ideas, drop them down into the comments. But this is a no space wasted vertical lumber storage system that will fit in just about any garage. So the original problem that I was trying to solve with this is that a lot of people do not have 8-foot ceilings in their garage. 7.5 feet is pretty standard, but whenever it comes to lumber and plywood, 8 feet is standard. So that means that typically anytime that you would get lumber or plywood, it was almost impossible to organize and you would have to lean it up against the wall, oftentimes leading to warping. So this rack is not only designed to fit in a 7.5 foot garage, but because of its angled structure, it will allow you to organize and store 8-foot lumber or plywood vertically. This not only saves you a ton of room, but it also protects your material. So as you can see, we have several different storage compartments, eliminating any waste. And then we have 2-foot, 4-foot, and 8-foot bays made for storing plywood or wider planks. And then on the front we have our dimensional lumber storage that can be organized in any way that you would like. And I haven't even told you the coolest part about this storage rack. You can fit over 1,200 board feet of lumber in 17 square feet. Let me show you how. So I guess what gave me the motivation to come up with this new storage rack was my old storage rack. I was doing some cleaning up here around the shop. Yeah, you really can't tell. But I just started looking at the old rack that I kind of threw together a few years back and realized just how much space that I was wasting. Plus, if my ceilings were only 7.5 foot tall, this system wouldn't work at all. I guess I'm a poet and didn't know it. And yeah, whenever you first look at it, it may look like that it's pretty organized. But if you pay attention to things like this, wasted space, everything has to be leaning. Wasted space up here. There's just a ton of wasted space here. Not only that, some of the other issues that I found out since I built this is things like this. If you put a thinner piece of material in here not supported by anything, it's going to eventually bow. Plus there's just some other things that just do not work, like the different sizes going into the same areas. But I do have to say that having a storage rack has been super handy over the years because I started off with everything like this. My ceilings at the time weren't tall enough for me to be able to store my sheet goods vertically, so they all just ended up leaning against the wall or wherever kind of place that I could find to put them. So whenever I finally had the room to start storing things vertically, that's what I did with all of my dimensional lumber. I actually used the stacking rack system as my dividers, but there's still a problem with this. Everything has to be at an angle to keep it from falling out and covering you up with material. So that leaves a ton of wasted space behind all of this. Plus the rack system that I was talking about that I used to divide up all of this, by the time that I had it angled out so that it wouldn't tip over, they're pretty much useless and just get buried. And then we have horizontal storage. So anytime that you have any type of horizontal storage like this, it is going to eat up precious wall space quickly. So I have over 8 foot of wall space here that's just taken up by pieces of material that, you know, you can't throw away. And I can't really stand this stuff up against the wall like I did over here, or you're pretty much going to be defeating the purpose of using all the space that you have. So I kept all of these different storage issues in mind while designing this new storage system. So let's go ahead and bring this new design to life. I'm going to start off just by getting my workstation set up. And for anyone out there that has made the hybrid workbench, this is a perfect use for that. Since we're going to start off by making the frames, we need a large work surface. So I'm just going to use a sheet of OSB that I'll actually be needing later as my work table for now. All right, so now that I have a little workstation set up and my super elaborate plans here, we can go ahead and start making the frames. Whenever I say frames, I'm referring to the part that will actually sit against the wall and the side that you will actually see from the outside. Once we get those two parts made, we'll just connect them. Now the super cool thing about this project is that every single cut can be made using a circular saw if you wanted. For the frames, we're only going to be making two different cuts. Your typical 90-degree cut and then a 25-degree angle. However you decide to do it's completely up to you, but there's no excuses on this one about not having the right tools. So let's go ahead and get this started by cutting our material for our two boards that are going to be our back board, which will go up against the wall, and then our bottom board, which will go against the floor. We're going to put these two boards together to make a 45-degree angle, and then the rest of the parts of this frame will be attached to one of these two boards in some way. For the long back board, we'll need one that is 89 7/8 inch long. And then for the bottom board, that'll be 67.5 inches long. And as always, I'm going to teach you step by step on how to build this lumber storage rack. But if you're a plans in the hand type of person, head over to my website. I'll make sure to throw a link in the description. And to attach these, I'm going to put a couple of 2.5 inch screws through the backboard into the baseboard. Now just keep in mind that any of the screws that are going into these boards need to be flush with the surface. Now that we have our bottom and our backboards cut, we can start filling all of this in. And for that, I'm going to start off by cutting my 4 horizontal boards, and then we'll move on to our angled boards. So from this point on, all of our boards will at least have one edge that has a 25-degree angle. Each one of these horizontal boards will be attached to our backboard, so we'll only be needing the 25-degree angle on the right-hand side. And any of these boards that I'll be using as a shelf, I'm just going to call them shelf boards. So the bottom shelf board is going to need to be 19 1/8 of an inch long. The middle shelf board needs to be 20.5 inches long. And then our third shelf board will cut at 12 3/4. And while we're cutting these, let's go ahead and cut our top board. And that part needs to be 12 1/4 of an inch long. Now let's attach our 3 shelf boards to our backboard. We're going to start by measuring up from the bottom and mark our backboard at 24 inches, 46 inches, and 62 inches. Then we'll just align the bottom of our shelf boards up with that mark and then attach those to our backboard. You'll want to make sure that your longest point of your angle is on the bottom side of each one of these boards. And then for our top board, we'll install this the same way, flush with the top of our backboard. Okay, so now that we have all of our horizontal boards attached, let's go ahead and cut and install our angled boards. So each one of these angled boards is going to have a 25-degree miter cut on each end going the same direction. So just as an example, they'll look something like this, except a lot longer. And any length that I give you on these will be from the tip of the top edge to the tip of the bottom edge. And I'm going to call each one of these angled boards support boards. Our first board needs to be cut 25.5 inches from tip to tip, and our second support board will cut it at 50 1/4. Then for these last two support boards, you'll need to use 9 or 10 foot material. Our fourth support board will be 97 1/4 of an inch long, and then our outside board will be 98 3/4 of an inch long. So now that we have all of our angled boards cut, that's pretty much all that there is of this frame except for putting it together. To make sure that everything's exactly where I want it, I'm going to mark my bottom board where the tips of each one of these support boards needs to fall. So with my tape measure hooked to my backboard, I'm going to make a mark at 21 1/8, 33 1/8, 45 1/8, and then 57 1/8. This is where the tips of each one of these boards need to be whenever I put my screws in. Now we'll just make our way up attaching our shelf boards to our support boards. Since each one of these support boards has a 25-degree angle on each side, all of the parts should be self-aligning. So no more measurements. For each shelf, you'll install 2 screws going down into your support board, and then 2 screws into the connecting support into your shelf board. Then we'll connect our top board to our third support, and then our outer board to our top board. Okay, so we have one frame completely done. That's all that you'll need to do is make another one identical, and then we'll tie the rest of this frame together. There's going to be one more separate piece of this that I want to build, and that's going to be a removable floor. And essentially, that's all that this is going to be. It's just something to get your material up off the concrete and keep it from absorbing moisture. So you may be asking, well, why don't you just connect everything with 2x4s? Well, I actually did that in my old storage system. That turned out to be one of the things that I disliked the most. Let's say that I'm sliding in some material to store. As the material will get further in, the weight of it would actually sink down, then I would end up having to pull on the top to push it the rest of the way in. Or let's say that your material wasn't quite wide enough to reach the other side, or fell in between your 2x4 that you had in the center. What would happen there is your wood would actually be stored at an angle and kind of threw everything off. So to prevent that from happening with this one, I'm just going to go ahead and put a floor in this. That way everything can just slide right through. And to build this floor, I'm just going to use some of this OSB that I've been working on, and then I'll be using these strips that I cut down from a 2x4. Each one of these are 1 inch and 1/16 thick. So why the extra 1/16 of an inch? Well, 1/2 of an inch OSB is only 15/16. And I want this to match up as best as I can with my 2x4s. So 1/16 it is. The OSB panel that I'm needing to make this floor needs to be 29 inches by 65.5 inches wide. And if you notice, I'm cutting this on the tables instead of doing this off of the floor. I cannot stand working off of the ground. So that's all that I've done, is to make sure to support each end with foam. Okay, so now that we have that cut, we can go ahead and cut our 1/16 material to length. And for this, I'll be needing 3 boards that are 62.5 inches long and 2 boards that are 29 inches long. Essentially, I'm lining all 4 ends and putting a board in the center. Since this is going to be the bottom of my floor, I'm just going to put a couple of 1¼ inch screws into place and flip this over and add a few more into each board from the opposite side. And then to throw a few screws into your center board, just measure over 14.5 inches. Alright, so now with our floor assembled, let's go ahead and put this thing together and finish it up. And just to temporarily hold these parts into place, I'm just going to throw in a couple of scab boards. This is just going to keep these sides stable while I work with it. At this point, I'm making sure that the back of each frame is lined up with the back of my floor. So again, these supports are not supposed to square this up or anything like that. We'll do that whenever we install our center braces. So for these brace boards, since our center is 29 inches wide, all of our bracing is going to be 29 inches wide. So I'm going to start off by installing 4 boards into what I'm calling the corners of this build. So it'll be the front, back, and then our 2 points at the top. And since this board is going to be sandwiched in between our 2 frames, you'll need to cut a couple of pocket holes on each end. So I'll start off by installing the board in the front. Once I get that installed, I can go ahead and remove my temporary brace in the front. And then I'm going to move to the back and install a brace on top of my floor connecting the 2 end frames. Now that I have that installed, I'll go ahead and remove my temporary brace from the back. And unless you're super tall, you'll probably need a ladder or something to stand on to put these top 2 boards in. My top brace on the front will be installed in between the 2 outer boards of our frame. So when positioning your board, just make sure that it follows the angle. And a little tip when working off of a ladder by yourself, go ahead and install the screws into their pockets, and then grab a squeeze clamp to support the bottom of one side while you're working on the other. And then for our top back brace, we're going to install it the exact same way that we did for the bottom back brace. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do, for each one of these shelves, we're going to be installing 2 rails, and the purpose of these are going to be to strengthen up the inside of this and also support our OSB whenever we add that in later. So for our shelf rails, we'll be needing 6 boards that are 1½ by 1½ by 29 inches long. And I just ripped mine out of 2x material. Now yes, you can buy 2x2s, but this is a lot cheaper. Then once you get those cut, we're going to put 1 pocket hole on each end. Just make sure that whenever you're cutting your pocket holes that you put one on one side, and then the second one on a different side. That's just going to help to keep this from twisting. Another thing that will stiffen these up will be the OSB that's sitting on top. And then for the rail on the side of the shelf with the 25-degree angle, we're going to install these 1 inch from the top edge. That way we have room to install our screws through our OSB here in a bit. Now with our shelf rails installed, let's go ahead and get our plywood guides installed. Right, so our plywood guides are pretty much just what it sounds like. They'll be installed in between our angle boards. That way whenever we slide our plywood in, it stays nice and straight. And then if you have a sheet that doesn't go all the way to the back, you still have support for that. So our plywood guides are the exact same size as our shelf rails. They're 1½ by 1½ by 29 inches long. And again, we have 1 pocket hole on each end. And we're going to need 10 of these. We'll install 2 of these into the back of our bottom compartment, 1 4 inches from the top and 1 4 inches from the bottom. And then for the back of our second compartment, we'll install 1 12 inches from the top and 1 12 inches from the bottom. And then for our 3rd or 8-foot compartment, we'll be installing one of these 2 foot from the top, 2 foot from the bottom. Now that we have our guide boards installed into our compartments, let's go ahead and install some in the front for our lumber storage. So for the front, since this is where a lot of the weight is going to be, I'm going to be installing 4 of these. These are also going to help to support our OSB. The first one I'll be installing at 6 foot from the bottom, the next one at 4 foot from the bottom, and then one at 2 foot from the bottom, and the last one will sit against the bottom, keeping this 25-degree angle. Okay, so we are almost done. The only thing left to do is to add the plywood. I'm starting to get super pumped to load this thing up. For a lumber rack that's only 7½ foot tall, this thing is going to hold a ton. So the floor that we originally built will act as the bottom shelf. And then for our second shelf, OSB will need to be 18½ inches wide by 3 foot long. For our third shelf, 19½ by 3 foot. For the top shelf, 11¾ by 3 foot. And then for the front or our lumber storage, it'll need to be 8 foot long by 3 foot wide. And then a board that's 1 7/8 inches by 3 foot for the top. And I'll be using 2¼ inch screws to lock all of this down. And don't forget to throw a couple of screws into your guides. And then we'll finish out this lumber rack and we are done. So for the lumber rack in the front, I'm going to install some dividers, and then for the base, just a board to keep our material from sliding out. So for the dividers, I'm just going to be using a couple of wall storage racks. These things are actually made to hold your wood horizontally, but in this case, they'll make perfect dividers for vertical stacking. You can either use something like this, or you can simply use 12-inch long, 1.5 by 1.5 material with pocket hole screws on one end. So if you decided to go with this system, it actually gives you several different options for spacing, and how you space these out will ultimately be to fit your needs. And for the last piece of this puzzle, like I mentioned earlier, we'll be installing a 2x4 by 36-inch board to the bottom of our lumber storage. This will just be to keep our material from sliding out. The very last screw, and I run out of battery. And for some reason, if your garage is a little taller and you have room to put wheels on this, it makes it nice to be able to move it around. But it was actually designed to be used without wheels in a 7.5-foot garage. So now that we have this baby put together, time for the fun part. Let's load her up. So I have my cart loaded down, and I have a couple of things that I want to hit on. For these angled sections, whenever you put your material in, sometimes it would want to slide a little bit. So I just took an old sanding belt, cut that in half, and then just stapled it down to the bottom. And really, you could even just use sanding sheets. But after installing a strip on each side, the grit on the sandpaper actually catches these edges really well and holds everything into place. And then for those that want to put this on wheels, since this was actually designed to sit flush on the ground, you'll have to add a couple of more support boards just to keep this bottom in place. That's all that you would need would be 3 more 2x4s that are 36 inches long. Attach one at the front, one in the back, and one in the center. And if you really wanted to sturdy this up and you had the room, I would go ahead and put an extra 2x4 on both sides of this. And I put casters on mine just to make it a little easier to move around for this video, but honestly, I'll probably end up taking them off because it's pretty much just going to be staying in one place. But if you do decide to put the casters on, I would actually put 3 on each side. Remember, this thing can hold up to 1,200 board feet of lumber. So just to make sure that the center is supported as well as both ends, I would go ahead and just put an extra one in the center on each side. So this thing has saved me a ton of room. Do you remember what this corner looked like at the beginning? Now this corner is all cleaned up and no more worries about my plywood warping. Now check out this other wall. So the storage system not only held all of my plywood, but I was able to free up 4 more feet of space on this wall by putting all of my non-treated lumber on the rack. And then my storage racks on this side, I was actually able to store an entire rack's worth of material into the shelves built into the back of this rack. Now this is going to free up an extra 4 feet of wall space. So all in all, this low profile vertical lumber storage rack has freed up more than 8 feet of precious wall space and also allowed me to organize all of my lumber and get it off of the ground. So if anyone out there has any storage problems that you want me to take a look at, drop them down into the comments. Or if you have any solutions that you think others may benefit from, drop those down there as well. And if anyone sees any issues that they have recommendations for, that is welcome as well. Until next time, guys, get up, get out, and get your make on. Imagine taking a pile of wood and turning it into something amazing. Now, imagine doing that without years of frustration. You do not need a fancy workshop, expensive tools, or years of experience. With Woodworking Kickstart, you'll build confidence and real skills in no time. So you can spend years making mistakes and learning the hard way like I did, or you can start building with confidence today. So join me in Woodworking Kickstart and let's get your journey started.